When I was 12, my life took a turn I never imagined. My parents decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. They sent me to live with my uncle in the countryside, leaving me with a heart full of questions and a suitcase of doubt. You see, my twin sister was their pride, the shining star they adored, while I was the shadow they wished to escape. It wasn't hard to see why they favored her. She was brilliant, a natural at everything she touched. Me? I was just average. In a family of overachievers, average is a crime. Both my parents were doctors, determined that my sister and I would follow in their footsteps. But deep down, I knew that path wasn't mine. I dreamed of creating, of expressing, but my parents had no patience for such nonsense. Their solution to my mediocrity? Relentless pressure. My days were an endless cycle of comparisons and cutting remarks. They didn't encourage me to do better, they crushed me for not being enough. By the time I hit middle school, I was drowning. Failing classes, losing confidence, I felt like I was constantly walking a tightrope, except no one cared if I fell. My teachers didn't understand. To them, I was lazy, a slacker who didn't try. And my peers? They never let me forget I was the other twin, the one who couldn't keep up. Every night, I cried myself to sleep. My parents' love wasn't unconditional, it was a transaction, and I had nothing to offer. One night, everything snapped. Dinner became a battleground, and my grades were the weapon. After another round of harsh words, I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, I lashed out, and they grounded me. For 2 weeks. Desperate to escape, I ran away with no plan, no destination. Just a park bench under a cold, unforgiving sky. The police found me hours later, sitting alone in the dark. My parents? They weren't worried about me, they were embarrassed. Their solution was swift and final. I was to be shipped off to my uncle's house. I begged them not to send me away, tears streaming as I promised to do better. But they had made up their minds. You're a burden, they said. We can't deal with you anymore. The day they dropped me off, they didn't even let my sister come along to say goodbye. That first week at my uncle's house was a blur of tears and heartbreak. My aunt and uncle were kind, they tried to help, but I couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. I called my parents repeatedly, but they ignored every attempt. Weeks turned into months. I realized there was no going back, so I began to adjust. My sister became my lifeline. She'd sneak in phone calls when our parents weren't around, and we'd whisper our secrets like nothing had changed. Social media was just becoming a thing, and through the glow of a computer screen, we stayed connected. As the years passed, I grew stronger. My uncle and aunt gave me the freedom I'd never known. They didn't demand perfection, they encouraged me to explore. For the first time, I joined school plays, played sports, and made friends without fear. That freedom led me to something I never expected, love. My husband and I met in high school. While my parents would have forbidden such a distraction, my uncle and aunt embraced it. We've been together ever since, navigating life as partners, attending college side by side. Last year, we graduated. A week later, we married in a small, beautiful ceremony. And now, we're parents to a baby boy, a little miracle who's filled our lives with joy. We live just a few streets away from my aunt and uncle, who dote on their grandson as if he's their own. My sister and I remain as close as ever, despite everything. She's kept me updated on our parents, who, after a decade of silence, are finally reaching out. But after all these years, I've built a life I never dreamed of, one filled with love, acceptance, and endless possibilities. For years, my younger sister and I had maintained a quiet bond, one that thrived in the shadows of family discord. But after she turned 18, everything changed. She made a bold decision. She no longer wanted to hide our relationship from our parents. Her defiance of the silence they'd imposed felt like a victory. She stood by me in ways that mattered deeply, serving as my maid of honor when I got married and even becoming the godmother to my child. She was my unwavering ally. Just last week, while she was visiting, she delivered news that set my heart racing. Our parents are planning to visit you, she said, her voice tinged with caution. She explained they had no idea about my life now, that I was married, had a child, and was thriving. No one had kept them updated because, frankly, no one cared to. They had been cut off by the family for abandoning me in my time of need. She revealed that after all these years, they were starting to feel regret. Their plan to reach out wasn't something she thought I should face unprepared. When the message finally came, through social media, no less, it was both underwhelming and infuriating. A simple, sterile request to visit. No apology. No acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. I was torn between ignoring them entirely or using this moment to confront them with the life they chose to abandon. I chose the latter. I invited them for dinner that weekend, along with my uncle, aunt, sister, husband, and son. The table was set not just for a meal, but for an inevitable reckoning. What I didn't disclose to my uncle and aunt was that my parents would be there. Their shock, upon arrival, was palpable. The air grew thick with the weight of unresolved history, a decade's worth of silence screaming louder than words. For years, my uncle and aunt had been my champions. They took me in when my parents left me behind, promising financial support but delivering little else. They fulfilled their obligations to the letter but not the spirit, leaving me emotionally adrift. My uncle, outraged by their neglect, rallied the family against them, severing ties. Their estrangement was born not just of betrayal but of a shared sense of morality. As dinner began, the tension was unbearable. The awkward small talk did little to mask the storm brewing beneath. I decided to take control of the evening with a toast. Rising from my seat, I let the words flow, not to ease the tension, but to twist the knife. I spoke of gratitude for my uncle and aunt, who had stood by me when no one else would. Gratitude for my sister, whose loyalty never wavered. Gratitude for my husband, who had built a beautiful life with me. Every word was a deliberate omission of my parents, a stark reminder of their absence. They sat silent, eyes cast downward, visibly shrinking under the weight of my words. When I turned to them, it was with calculated precision. "Now, I'd like to introduce you to my new family," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. My mother's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Tears streaming down her face, she fled the room, leaving an air of shattered pride in her wake. My father followed, though with a far less theatrical exit. The silence they left behind was deafening. Dessert was abandoned. The evening ended as it had begun, heavy and unresolved. Afterward, I wrestled with my emotions. Triumph? Regret? Somewhere in the mix, I felt the faint sting of guilt. My husband and sister thought I had gone too far. They argued I should have ignored the message if I didn't want to engage. They weren't wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to agree. It took me days to gather the courage to reach out to my uncle and aunt. When I finally did, my apologies poured out before they could say a word. My uncle's response was measured. He admitted he had been shocked but reassured me it was water under the bridge. My aunt echoed his sentiment, her kindness offering me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. But as for my parents, I wasn't ready to forgive. An apology? After all they put me through during my childhood? It's not something I feel compelled to give, nor do I think anyone in my position would. They haven't apologized to me, not once, so I can't see why I should extend the olive branch first. I talked this over with my husband. He suggested I apologize, but I laid everything bare for him. Yes, my actions at the dinner were uncalled for, but they paled in comparison to the years of mistreatment I endured. After hearing me out, he understood my stance and chose not to press the issue further. I had a similar conversation with my sister. While she was initially skeptical, she ultimately told me it was my decision to make. After all, I was the one who had been wronged, so whatever choice I made would be fair. Still, she mentioned she hadn't been able to get in touch with our parents all week. They had gone suspiciously quiet, likely keeping a low profile for now. But I knew it wouldn't last. Sooner or later, they'd resurface, demanding an apology or stirring up drama, just like they always do. Speaking of my sister, I need to clear something up. Some people seem to think she's trying to play diplomat by maintaining a good relationship with our parents. Let me be perfectly clear, even if that were true, I wouldn't hold it against her. She understands what they did to me was wrong, but back then, she was just a child too. What could she have done? She couldn't protest or stand up for me, not at that age. She kept in touch with me as best she could, and honestly, that's enough. The reason she's still in contact with our parents is simple. They're getting older, and she doesn't want the guilt of abandoning them. That's all there is to it. It's not as deep as some people make it out to be. The accusations being thrown her way are unnecessary and, frankly, unfair. We love and support each other, and she doesn't deserve this criticism. Now, on to what happened recently. As I mentioned in my last update, I knew my parents wouldn't just let my actions at the dinner slide. They're not the type to forgive and forget. I expected some form of retaliation, and today, it finally came. 10 days after that disastrous dinner, they went public with the incident. They took to social media, which was surprising since they're not particularly active online. But for this, they made an exception. The post, of course, was entirely one-sided. They painted themselves as the victims, conveniently leaving out everything they've done to me in the past. Honestly, if the post had only been visible to family members, I wouldn't have cared. Most of our relatives are well aware of their history, abandoning me, refusing to keep in touch, so their sob story wouldn't hold much weight. But my parents were smarter than that. They didn't just keep this within the family. No, they went ahead and tagged my coworkers. And not just mine, my husband's colleagues too, even though he had absolutely nothing to do with this mess. Understandably, my coworkers were blindsided. They had no idea about my strained relationship with my parents, so being dragged into this drama was a shock. Messages flooded my phone as they tried to make sense of what they'd just been tagged in. I'm currently on maternity leave, so I wasn't checking social media regularly. My days are consumed with caring for my son. But after receiving a barrage of messages from colleagues urging me to check the post, I finally did. What I saw left me stunned. For a moment, I didn't even know how to react. It was clear that my parents had been stalking my social media, digging through my posts and photos to find out who my friends and coworkers were. All so they could weaponize this against me. But I refused to let them control the narrative. I decided to comment on their post and set the record straight. I had nothing to hide. I was the victim here. Sure, what I said at the dinner was harsh, but it wasn't unjustified. In my comment, I laid everything out, the years of neglect, how they abandoned me at my uncle's house, and how they never apologized, not even when they re-entered my life. I made it clear that their actions at the dinner were just another chapter in a long history of mistreatment. I also reached out to my coworkers privately. I apologized to them for being dragged into this mess. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire, and I told them as much. It was infuriating that my parents stooped so low, targeting innocent people just to tarnish my reputation. He had mentioned earlier that he'd be tied up in an important meeting with a client today, so I didn't even consider reaching out to him about this. Honestly, this feels like petty drama, something I can handle on my own. I've already spoken to my sister about it, and she agrees. Our parents have lost their minds over this. It seems they couldn't stomach what they perceived as disrespect, and their reaction spiraled completely out of control. That has to be the explanation. But even so, nothing justifies behavior like this. I haven't told my uncle or aunt yet. They're incredibly busy with work, and I'd rather not burden them unless it becomes absolutely necessary. I know their reaction would be strong, and I'm not ready to deal with that on top of everything else. Update 3. A few hours have passed since my last post. It's now 8 o'clock in the evening, and my house is a full-on war room. My uncle, aunt, sister, and husband are all here, and we're brainstorming ways to tackle this mess. I know many of you have suggested going the legal route, but I just don't have the energy or time for that right now. Filing a petition and dealing with the legal process feels unnecessary at this stage. Our priority is to resolve this personally, keeping lawyers out of it for as long as we can. Of course, if they refuse to remove the post, I'll have no choice but to involve an attorney and pursue a defamation case. For now, though, we're doing everything we can to have it taken down. Everyone has messaged them, pleading for them to delete the post, but there's been no response. No acknowledgement. What's worse is that they haven't even bothered to delete my comment. At least that means people who see the post can read my side of the story. But the traction this post is getting is alarming. Somehow, it's popping up on my acquaintances' feeds too, and I keep getting questions from people I barely know. It's exhausting, having to explain myself over and over. I suspect the post is still appearing because they tagged me, though I've already removed the tag. Maybe it's some kind of app glitch, but it doesn't matter, it's damaging all the same. People could just read my comment and move on, but for some reason, they feel the need to reach out personally, making this ordeal even more frustrating. My biggest fear is that this drama might reach HR. If that happens, it could seriously harm my reputation at work, and I can't afford that, not over something so ridiculous. My family and I are doing everything in our power to resolve this peacefully, but so far, there's no sign of cooperation from their end. My sister has offered to visit our parents tomorrow to confront them in person. If they still refuse to take the post down, we'll have no choice but to involve a lawyer. I'm praying it doesn't come to that. My focus should be on my son and enjoying this precious time on maternity leave, not dealing with their childish antics. Update 4. This morning, my sister went to our parents' house. She spent an hour there, and for that entire time, I had no idea what was happening. Finally, half an hour ago, she called to update me. She explained that she'd had a long talk with them. Apparently, my parents were deeply upset, which is why they'd made the post and tagged my coworkers. Turns out, they had found my coworkers' social media accounts by stalking me online. Creepy, yes, but that's the least of my concerns right now. During their conversation, my parents admitted they would take the post down, but only if I apologized to them first. I didn't hesitate for even a second before telling my sister that it was a firm no. I have nothing to apologize for, and I'm standing my ground. Thankfully, my sister knows me well enough to expect this. She told our parents that under no circumstances would I apologize for something I didn't do. She warned them that if they didn't delete the post, we'd be forced to take legal action, and that wouldn't end well for them. The discussion dragged on for nearly an hour. In the end, they begrudgingly agreed to remove the post but declared they were cutting me out of their lives and their inheritance. Honestly, I couldn't care less. I just wanted the post gone. My husband and I are doing well for ourselves, and we've built a secure future for our family. Their inheritance means nothing to me. My sister relayed this to them, making sure they understood exactly where I stand. Now that this ordeal is over, I can finally focus on what truly matters, spending time with my son and making the most of my maternity leave. Thank you all for your unwavering support throughout this chaos.